Just once. It's showing recording, right? Shomo, is it showing recording?
It is.
Yes, it is.
It is.
It's recording. It's being recorded.
It gave an option of recording on the cloud and recording on the computer. I chose cloud, and then I saw a cloud happening. Physical.
Then it might be in the cloud.
Yeah. So, Lakshmi, mute her. Mute her.
I'm admitting all of them as they are coming. So
yeah, please admit all, and
yes.
Keep muting them, because I that is
right.
something that is going to happen.
Just by way of clarification.
Yeah.
And just by way of clarification, this has been advertised to Batspa University students as well. But I know that both our year 2 and year 3 students are currently in class. So if they're able to finish, then they'll probably be able to join. But on the other hand, if they're not, then that might actually create problems. But the recording will be incredibly helpful. But I just wanted to let you know.
No, thank you, Dr. Ghosh. Great, and we are looking forward to them also participating. We've requested our students and all our faculty members to join, and especially from other streams as well. But so we had a fantastic webinar topic. So I think they are all,
I'm sure they
on
will.
the fences, sitting on the fences.
They'll just gather some courage, and they will.
Yeah. Now we'll share the recording. We'll share the recording.
Right.
So let's begin. So, dear students and faculty members of Batspa University and Adamas University, my name is Professor Dr. Mahul Brahma, and I am the Dean of School of Media and Communication at Adamas University. A little about me. I have been a chief editor and a senior journalist for a decade with the Economic Times, the New York Times, and India Partner, CNBC TV 18, and other media houses. For the past decade, just before my academic career began at Adamas, I was with the Tata Group. I was heading the corporate communications, branding, and CSR, along with the publications division. So I am a TEDx speaker and on the mythic value of luxury. And I have a session with the global citizenship students on 2nd November, and I look forward to that. I'm an author, and I have written 5 books, a trilogy called the Lux Trilogy, which is on luxury, and they are Decoding Lux, Dark Lux, and Lux Inferno. And my latest book is How to Communicate Strategically in the Corporate World. So I have made films, short films. My first short film was screened at Cannes Film Festival in 2016. And I do act in Bengali films. So I'm a golfer, and John is also a golfer, so we plan to play together sometime. And so let me, without further ado, introduce John. But just I'll ask all of you to kindly mute your microphones and keep your cameras off for the entire session. Whatever questions you have, keep typing at the chat box. So first, John will, give the welcome speech. Then I'll say a few things, and then it'll be over to Dr. Shumon Ghosh, your faculty at Batspa, and then it'll be over to Mr. Shomo Shubhra Das, the faculty at Adamas. And then post these 2 sessions, we will be open to a question answer session, wherein I will be reading out all the questions that you have to the two speakers, and they can take it forward from there. So this is the flow. More or less the time estimated is around 1 hour, 30 minutes. So without further ado, I'll introduce John. So John Stratton is the Pro Vice Chancellor for Research and Enterprise, Dean of Graduate College, and Director of the Corsham Court Campus. He was previously Dean, School of Humanities and Cultural Industries at BATSPA, and before that, Associate Dean for Research at HCI. He previously has held chairs at Northumbria University and the University of Sunderland. John is a professor of English literature and an associate editor of the Oxford Companion to English Literature, a fellow of the Royal Historical Society, and a fellow of the Royal Asiatic Society. He is chair of the Guild HE Research Group and co-chair of Charles Lamb Society. So,
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
So I'll request everybody to mute their microphones, please. And over to you, John.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mahul. That's really kind of you. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome everyone to the first of our webinar collaborations between the School of Media and Communications at Adamas University and the equivalent at our own university, the School of Art, Film and Media at BATSPA University. I'm John Strachan, Professor of English Literature at BATSPA, as Professor Dr. Mahul has said, and also Pro Vice Chancellor with special responsibility for research and international. So I'm delighted to open this excellent series. Over the last few years, BATSPA University has developed a very strong relationship with Adamas University. And I had the great pleasure of visiting the wonderful historic city of Kolkata and your wonderful university, highly impressive university campus in 2019, where I signed a memorandum of understanding between our two universities, signed by myself and your distinguished and esteemed Chancellor, Professor Samit Ray. Some of you may have been there because the audience was over 3,000 people, and what a wonderful day that was. I also had the great pleasure in my time at your university of meeting and chatting with many Adamas students, and I was really struck by their enthusiasm, drive and intelligence, excellent English, brilliant questions, and just, you know, I was very struck by the high quality of Adamas students. Well, coincidentally, the United Kingdom Research and Innovation Council has published this very week a report on the importance of collaboration between British and Indian higher education. And these links are certainly vital to us and to our university. In our work in India, in New Delhi, in Chennai, and most importantly, with, to my mind, with yourselves in Adamas. So welcome to you all, and what a fascinating and intriguing topic we have to hear about today. So I'm honoured and delighted to be here, and I'm happy to hand back to my friend and colleague, Professor Dr. Mahul Brahma, who will say a few words to introduce our session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Thanks so much. We were, we've had a fantastic relationship with BATSPA, and BATSPA has been extremely, and I must, put it on record that BATSPA and John and the entire team of John has been extremely helpful from day one to build this collaborative effort that we are doing in the form of 3 webinars. And the first webinar is today. There'll be 2 more webinars, one on journalism, the other on communication. When I took over, and this is my first, as I said, I am from the corporate, and this is my first assignment in academics. I was looking at the, looking at how to build the linkages, corporate people, they think of how to grow businesses. So I was also looking at academically how we can reach out to our partners internationally, because, what we need very badly is a cultural exchange. And unfortunately, because we are not able to visit each other because of the COVID, there has been a stop. But at the same time, this has also opened a beautiful domain, a beautiful arena wherein globally we are able to connect across continents. During this season, this COVID session, for the past 1.5 years, I have been, able to take sessions at IITs, IIMs, and even become a visiting lecturer at University of Scranton in US. Now, all this was possible because I was doing it from my home. It wouldn't have been possible had I been physically going and coming back, because I had a full-time job. Now, it is this exposure that I finally realized that I love to teach, I love to talk to students, I love to interact. And therefore, it made it very easy for me to make the switch from the Tata Group to this university. And I'm grateful that in my first step, my first collaboration was with somebody like John and with Batspa. So I'm very grateful that, maybe beginner's luck. And, we had a great interaction, every interaction that we had from the first day. So from the first day, I'll request everybody to mute themselves, please. Yeah, from the first day, we've had a great relationship. Guys, please mute yourself. Guys, please mute yourself. It just, yeah. So we've had a great interaction. And see, the objective of John and mine is that the collaboration at the end of the day should benefit the students. It is a cultural exchange that we are trying to facilitate online, virtually. And therefore, Dr. Shumon and Mr. Shomo Shubro, they have come up with this wonderful topic today, which would interest all of you. And with this, we want to send out a message that, we are open to discussions, we are open to talks, and we are here to break the taboo that is there with the age-old thinking process. Our Honorable Chancellor is very excited about this collaboration. Rajot Shubro, Mr. Rajot Shubro Roy, he has been one of the key members as the Associate Director of International Relations to drive this and support me. So I'm thankful to Rajat, for all his support. He unfortunately, I think, not able to join, so he's asked me to send a recording. He's traveling, but he's been extremely supportive. Our Honorable VC Sir, Dr. Deependra Kumar Jha, he was very excited to come here and address all of you. Unfortunately, he had a family exigency and had to go. He's not able to, but he has sent his best wishes, and he is extremely hopeful that the collaboration with Batspa, the Adamas students, will be extremely beneficial. And so, without further ado, I would like to pass on the baton to Dr. Shumon Ghosh for his session. So, Dr. Ghosh, before you take on the mantle, I would like to just very briefly introduce you. Dr. Shumon Ghosh is a senior lecturer in film and screen studies. He was a senior reporter with the Asian Age, India, where he opted for an academic career and joined Jadavpur University, India, as a lecturer in comparative literature. He completed his PhD on films and screenplays of Satyajit Ray from Lancaster University, UK. He taught film studies in the universities of Lancaster and Central Lancashire before he joined Bhatspa University in September 2010. So, without further ado, over to you, Dr. Ghosh.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Brahma, Professor Strachan, and everyone who has come in today to listen to this rather interestingly themed set of presentations as part of the sort of first webinar between our two institutions. It's a great pleasure to be able to sort of deliver this talk on Indian popular cinema. Now, there are two parts to this, and the second part is obviously by Shoma Shubhra. Shoma Shubhra, who will be talking about kissing in Hindi popular film. And when we discussed this between ourselves, what we agreed was that we might be able to address this theme from very different points of view. So I will start by sharing my screen, and hopefully the first slide will give you a sense of what I intend to talk about. Can I just check?
It is visible, Dr. Ghosh.
It's visible.
It is visible.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you. There's a possibility that this might be, yes, slightly chopped off. No, it isn't. Excellent. Thank you. My presentation is called On-Screen Intimacies, a colonial encounter. And what
Dr. Ghosh, if you can kindly share it in a presentation mode. So in below you have this this icon. Yeah, thank you. I think now it's brilliant. Yeah.
No, thank you very much. So I will be talking about the early phase of Indian cinema, the early phase of Indian cinema stretching right down to 1947. We will be talking about the kind of colonial encounter that produced a particularly complex form of cinema, and how intimacy and the portrayal of intimacy and kissing being a symbol of that portrayal becomes such an important factor. So in that sense, it will be about this entire presentation is going to be about two different kinds of popular cinema: a post-independence popular cinema from Shoma Shubhra and a pre-independence popular cinema from myself. So one of the first things that I think is worth starting with is that Indian cinema begins pretty much around the same time as cinemas across other parts of the world. This is the Watson's Hotel, Mumbai, then Bombay, and this is 1896. And the 7th of July, 1896, and the 1890s is basically the time when the Lumiere brothers and several others are screening their work. And this is a screening of the Lumiere brothers films, and the cinematography, the cinematograph, as it is sort of described then, is something which captures the imagination, the hearts and minds, if you will, of people across various parts of the world. There are 6 films screened that evening. They're listed there in this poster. And this poster talks about the wonder of the world, the marvel of the cinema, and the life-sized reproductions that are being brought to the screen experience. What I'm basically saying is that film culture in India begins pretty much the same as film cultures at around the same time as film cultures across various parts of the world. And that, in a sense, is the first interesting point. How then did film culture in India become slightly different? There's a couple of questions that are worth looking at. One of these is the political context of India in the period between the 1890s until 1947. 1947 is the year, 1947 being the year when India becomes an independent country. Now, this period between 1896, 97, and 1947 is a particularly eventful period. It is a period in which the struggle sort of gathers momentum and then coalesces and becomes structured into a kind of resistance which draws the attention of nations and peoples across various parts of the world. And this is also the period that we will talk about in terms of the unfolding of Indian film. So you have some of the early pioneers, Hiralal Sen among them, D.G. Palke, probably one of the most prolific among the early pioneers. And Palke learns his craft in Germany and then practices some of his craft in London. And then he goes back with a lot of equipment. And that is how he wants to set up his filmmaking business. But he wants to set up his filmmaking business as part of his wider intention to create a kind of expression, a kind of creative expression, which is in tune with the requirements of India at that time. So one of the things he does is he draws on mythologicals. And then Palke's form of filmmaking and the mythologicals that are so incredibly successful that he creates, that form of filmmaking suddenly becomes incredibly powerful because it becomes incredibly popular. So that is one of the ways in which filmmaking starts. However, it is not the only way. So here at the right, you have a poster of Raja Harishchandra, which is the first feature film that Palke makes. And this is made at a time when the Swadeshi movement in India is particularly strong. The Swadeshi movement, which basically talks about the ways in which everything that needed to be done in India by Indian people had to be made in India. Everything that needed to be bought had to be made in India. So it's about national wealth and securing national pride as the first step to setting up a struggle against the colonial, the colonial sort of rule, right? So there's two examples from different posters of the Swadeshi movement, and it says a little bit about the ways in which this is a pan-Indian movement. And Palke, making his mythologicals, puts himself right at the center of this, and that's one of the reasons why his films capture the imagination of a lot of people. However, that is, as I said, not the only form of filmmaking, and filmmaking suddenly becomes polarized by the rhetoric of Swadeshi. So Palke is very Swadeshi entertainment, including images of colonial pasts from India. And a lot of this draws parallels with the kind of rhetoric and the kind of narrative that comes from Gandhi. And Gandhi obviously is one of the great proponents of Swadeshi. But Gandhi, incredibly powerful and iconic throughout the 1920s and 1930s, is also somebody who was sort of famously resistant to the cinema. And the reason is that he was suspicious of the kind of influence that cinema was having culturally. Now, this kind of suspicion is something that was rooted in some of the other kinds of films that were being made, the ones that were not mythologicals, right? There were others who were more sympathetic to the possibilities of cinema, including Gandhi's close collaborator, Tagore, who actually went on to direct a film himself. Now, the reason why Gandhi was suspicious is because there were stories being told, but these were stories which involved intimate relationships between men and women. And he looked at that as a kind of corrosive influence. The socials that were being made, films like Jamai Babu, for instance, which was made in 1931, about a country gentleman who comes to the city of Calcutta, and then he gets lost because he is untutored in the ways of the city. And then, of course, late at night, he manages to find his way into his father-in-law's house, his parents-in-law's house, and he manages to reunite with his wife, and he's kissing her, and then suddenly people begin to hear sounds, noises, and then they chase him, and they think he's a thief. It's a short comedy, but on the other hand, it says a little bit about the ways in which kissing becomes sort of integral to the narrative of these films. There's quite a few of these sort of social films which are made during this period, and they sort of attract a kind of attention which was sort of fairly negative. And Gandhi was one of the people who sort of articulated his opposition to this kind of filmmaking. He saw it as dissipative, and on-screen intimacy in early cinema came in for a fairly, a serious bit of stick. It wasn't helped by the Act of 1918, the Cinematograph Act, which determined which films were suitable for public exhibition, right? They abhorred sex and violence. That was a strict no-no. But when it came to policing these films, something very curious and very strange happened. You have before you a poster from with stills from two different films, Heer Ranjha 1929 and A Throw of Dice, also made in 1929. Very different actors, very similar situations, right? How were these films then allowed to pass? The thing is that in practice, a lot of the censorship was based around the politics of the time. So the Cinematograph Act 1918, what it said was that sex and violence couldn't be portrayed on screen, but it was far more concerned in reality about scenes holding up the king's uniform to contempt, or subjects dealing with India in which British or Indian officers are seen in an odious light. In other words, it was far more concerned with the anti-colonial struggle. So these films were allowed to pass because there were others that were the primary target of censorship. It clothed this kind of narrative by appointing different committees. There was a committee appointed by the government, I think it was in the 1920s. It was presided over by a judge called T. Rangacharya. And this is a committee which interviewed a lot of people, and they wanted to see what the impact of cinema was. And they published their report in 1927. And one of the things they saw was that Hollywood films roughly accounted for 80% of the shows in these early years in India. But the crowds which really flocked to witness films were looking for popular Indian films. And that, it found, was remarkable. So on the one hand, there were these objections on paper, but on the other hand, in practice, Indian cinema was increasingly featuring actors and actresses willing to kiss on screen and break taboos in the 1920s and the 1930s. You have two examples. There are many more from the 1920s and 1930s. Some of them involved kissing quite often. That's what the report says. One of these kisses, which was sort of famously recorded as a 4-minute long sequence, eventually went on to become a minute and a half, was from a film called Karma, right? And that was made in 1933. And it involved Devika Rani, who was the sort of leading lady of the screen as she was described in those terms, right? And that was in the 1930s. So throughout the 1920s and the 1930s, kissing was not a big deal. That's basically one of the first things that I wanted to say. And in this, Indian cinema wasn't really massively different to film cultures across other parts of the world, right? However, this was not Swadeshi, Swadeshi entertainment. This was not the kind of entertainment that, for instance, somebody like Gandhi was a massive fan of. There was an element of voyeurism in it, which was strictly sort of, frowned upon. And this voyeurism came from some of the major studios, including Bombay Talkies. And Bombay Talkies was led by Himanshu Rai, and Himanshu Rai worked in London, and then he struck up friendships with the Germans, and he entered into a relationship with the Bavarian film company, And he enlisted German directors, including Franz Osten, to film popular movies in Hindi. And all of these films, therefore, featured kissing sequences in greater or less measure. Some of these actors and actresses were Indian, some of them not. There were a couple of English actresses, including Constance, Penelope Constance, and many others. So what we're looking at is a very, very different kind of landscape until the 1940s. Now, the question is, of course, why this was the way it was. Now, Himanshu Rai and many others who were behind the kind of films that were being made, Bombay Talkies and the other major studios, they were also trying to create a kind of wider symbol in terms of creating an acceptability for Indian films in markets abroad. So this internationalist outlook, for instance, a film like Karma, which was made in 1933, features multiple kissing sequences. It was actually filmed in the Stoll Studios, London. It is presented as a kind of Orientalist fantasy, and it featured Devika Rani, and it was covered in Variety and a lot of other magazines. Variety described it as a sort of modern American romance done against an Indian background. The film didn't do very well in India, but it did do fairly well abroad. Karma was also, the other thing about Karma was that it was directed by a man called John Freer Hunt. John Freer Hunt was a British and German director, and he worked with the Indian and British Film Production Company. And he got Ernest Broadhurst to score the music for the film. So in that sense, these are films which are incredibly internationalist and which are sort of collaborative ventures between India and Britain at a time when the political struggle for resistance was something which had created a massive conflict between India and Britain. Because Gandhi had become an icon in the 1930s, and to a certain extent, for a lot of people, the last days of the empire were clearly not that far away. So even in a time of intense political discord, what we see is the ability of cinema, Indian popular cinema, to sort of create narratives of integration. What happened after the 1940s, however, is very strange. Because it was a post-independent country, and Gandhian values, which were integrated into the very fabric of the nation state, they were integrated into India's constitution, into the directive principles of state policy, and the Gandhian dislike of cinema. The cinema, Gandhi said, was bad as far as he was concerned, a source of evil. And that is the kind of rhetoric that you see in a lot of the sort of judgment that is passed on film, right? The other thing that I think is important is to look at the kind of resistance towards technological change. And that was a very important part of the, the project to police the cinema, right? This is also something which stems from the Gandhian dislike. And that's also one of the reasons why in the first phase of India's independence, what we see is an emphasis on films becoming family entertainment, looking at an agrarian way of life. Mother India is obviously one of the most iconic examples of this kind of cinema. But that's also one of the reasons why it sort of veers away from the kind of social dramas which feature kissing in the 1930s and the 1940s and builds up a very different kind of filmmaking. A lot of this is because it becomes part of that grander project of nation building. Obviously, it attracts questions, and this is what we will end with, the questions. The censorship was not something which was very popular with the press. So you have two examples here in this slide, one from the 1950s, early 1950, which talks about the vagaries of the censors, right? And that different censor boards in different parts of the country seem to be operating in different ways, and they seem to be censoring films and banning films at will, including a lot of American films, which the British government at that point in time had thought were and the early Indian, and the face of the Indian government had thought were detrimental to the public interest, right? So this included not just Indian films, but American films and films from other parts of the world as well, right? Films which were viewed to be political propaganda from other parts of the world. That too was frowned upon. But one of the things which came in for a serious bit of stake was kissing. By the 1960s, there were obviously, serious questions being asked. This example from as far as early as 1955, I think, May 1955, from Filmfare says, why can't we love like that anymore? What I'm basically trying to say is that this is not a question that we are asking in 2020 or 2021. This has been a question which India has been asking of itself for a very long time. And that's one of the things that you see in the ways in which film magazines sort of responded to questions of censorship. However, it was a massive upheaval and a massive uphill struggle. And that is a struggle that the next paper will probably say a little bit about. So this is where I end my part of the presentation. Happy to take any questions from you and take things from there. Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Ghosh. I was actually taking notes. It's such a wonderful presentation and so rich. There is so much that I was not aware of. The kind of clarity of mind, the kind of culture, which is such a beautiful culture that we have left behind. It's such a it's such a shame, and I really hope that the kind of rich culture, the kind of progressive culture that we actually had at that point of time, we're able to revive that culture in the near future. So we will look forward to that. And thank you. It was a beautiful and brilliant presentation. So Dr. Ghosh, I will reserve the questions for the end, because students might have questions which maybe you and Shomo can together respond to. So excuse me. So I will take the questions at the end. So dear students, you've heard Dr. Ghosh. You please type in your questions in the chat box. At the end, after Shomo sir's session is over, then only I will be able to take the questions. So thank you, Dr. Ghosh. So before I call Shomo on to take on his session, let me just introduce you to a little bit. So Shomo has been teaching and making films for the past 15 years. He has been a resource person and a MOOC coordinator at Swayam, a MOOC program under Ministry of HRD, the Government of India. With a degree in film studies, he's pursuing his PhD in land relations in Hindi films. His last short film, Mocho, is critically acclaimed and has won several accolades and has been showcased in both national and international film festivals. So, a little bit about Shomo. He's my colleague, and he heads the Department of Entertainment Media, and it's been a pleasure that I've been working with him since my joining Adamas, which is in July, and it's a pleasure working with him. He has very different takes on things. He's very popular among students, very popular, I'm so glad he's so popular, quite enviably popular. And as we were saying, that this topic that we've taken up together today is something that I knew he would be able to execute, and he was very excited about it. And just a nugget of information on Shomo. Dr. Shumon Ghosh is Shomo's teacher. So there is a student-teacher relationship here also, which I thought that I will share with you. So without further ado, Shomo, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Our respected dean. His words were so embarrassing, and I was just wondering, so that was, I'm at a loss of words. And it's such a great pleasure to hear Shumon Da, as we call our professors in Jadavpur University, our very beloved Professor Shumon Ghosh. And I still remember why and how we were very sad when he was leaving Jadavpur University. So, this is some kind of a cinematic narrative that we meet again. And he has changed a lot. But I'm yet to get out of that thing that yes, I have met him again. And a lot of things, even today, when I teach students about Bharat's Natya Shastra, theater, cinema, it's always this person who is there in my mind, and it's there are no words with which I can thank him. And his presentation is such lucid, and it has created the ideal background for my presentation. So I'll just straight away go to my presentation, and we'll start. Okay. Yes. Yes. So, my topic is ban on kissing and how and what it means. And kissing is something that is very much, it's a part of life, whether you're an Indian or an American or British. And as cinema talks about life, it recreates life on silver screen, on television, on wherever you see. It has to portray all those sweetest things of life. So let's have a recap of what Shumon Da had said right now. Now, in 1929, we had A Throw of Dice, Karma in 1933, Jamai Babu. It's one of my favorite films in 1931. It portrays Kolkata. We haven't seen Kolkata in that period of time, in such a, with all those outdoor shots. All these three films, they had prolonged kissing scenes. And kissing came as a part of the narrative. It wasn't manipulated or just like that, we have to show kissing. No, it wasn't. But as we all know, cinema, especially Indian cinema, has reacted or has been, has been a site of reflection of the larger political developments. As Professor Ghosh, Shumon Da, rightly pointed out that Swadeshi films were one of the targets of the British imperial censorship board, and hence they had no problem with kissing. But soon after 1947, that is the Indian independence, and in fostered by the Cinematograph Act of 1952, something was again implemented as some kind of a national characteristic. This was the period when we were no more colonized. We were a free country. And there are two things that I would like to mention. First and foremost, when we talk about Indian cinema, nowadays we take it for granted that it's Bollywood. Now, Bollywood just the best business, projection of a particular region of India. It speaks in a language that is not a national language, or it doesn't represent India. That is Hindi. Of course, Hindi is a widespread language. It is one of our, everyone can speak Hindi thanks to, television and films, but Hindi is not our national language. Of course, it's one of the very important languages, of course. So Indian cinema is not equal to Hindi cinema or Bollywood. That's the first point. Second is, there is nothing called Indian cinema as such. There's nothing called Indian cinema. So you have regional cinemas, you have Bengali films, Hindi films, Bhojpuri films, but you don't have Indian cinema as such. When you're saying Indian cinema, Actually, it's a representation of all the cinema industries of India. Now, coming back to our crisis with kissing. So the Cinematograph Act of 1952 implemented the fact that kissing is not national. Yes, so kissing is not national. And unlike the previous era where kissing was not a problem, but after independence, we realized that this very idea of kissing between a couple is actually non-Indian and Western. So it was a kind of a threat to the new freedom that the Indians, fought for. Okay, now I would like to point out the results of a committee that was appointed in 1969. So G.D. Khosla committee, they did a lot of research, surveys, and they found out that this prohibition on kissing or prohibition of the private or the intimate scenes, they were based on unwritten rules. The previous rules were, it's here, excessive passionate love scenes, indelicate sexual situations. Now, the third point is most important: scenes suggestive of immorality. Now, here lies one of the key words that that can be interpreted in multiple ways. How do you define morality or immorality? It depends on specific cultures. It depends on one's orientation with modernity, how he sees tradition, and so on. And in India, this term is very ambiguous. Now, when I talk about nation, of course, how do we portray it through our culture? Now, there is certain kind of why ban on kissing was implemented, an unwritten rule. It had got to do with how we represent our culture, the new culture called Indian. So as a process of nation building, among other things. So kissing is related to a nationalist culture. There's no doubt about it. Now, it also represents a certain elusive idea of Indianness. Now, there is a problem when we talk about Swadeshi films, when we talk about Indian films, the Indianness. How do you define Indianness? India is it's a heterogeneous country. Now, how do you define or see India through a homogeneous culture? Now, I know the 90s and the 2000s, the post-globalization films, the NRI films, they celebrated a certain kind of homogeneous culture of Indianness, which is the North Indian upper caste, upper class NRIs. Of course, Hindu. That's one of the facets, the projection of the idea of a nation, which is actually an imagination. And the third point here is resistance to a Western culture. Now, India had never been a nation until and unless we got our freedom. As I'm an Indian, in 1947, India emerged as a nation. And for the past 200 years, it was just a colony. And before the Britishers had taken over, we were kingdoms, kingdoms fighting with each other. Of course, we have to take it for granted that it was only after or just after French Revolution, Industrial Revolution, that the kingdoms were crumbling down and rise of the nations were on the roll thanks to capitalism. Let's move on. Okay, the G.D. Khosla committee, after their survey and their research, they recommended that there was no point in banning a kiss scene. So G.D. Khosla committee, it was under the purview of the Indian government. They recommended that there's no point in banning a kissing scene on the screen. So there's no base on it. But following that recommendation, there were a few surveys, and the surveys, they are reflecting on this page. 51% of people said that there should be a ban on kissing. Yes, it's the Indian survey reflected that majority of the people, they wanted a ban on the kiss. And only 33.3% said that, yes, the ban should be lifted. And I have some interesting figures. 52% of the men who voted for ban on kissing. And only 45% of women voted for and voted against it. So this is something, food for thought. But yes, the gender and the history and how a nation shapes up its culture and how it sees its women, it's a different debate altogether. Okay, now we come to the act 2 of our entire presentation. Hindi popular films knew that kissing was not popular. There might be a lot of reactions against it. Even now in 2021, there might be a lot of repercussions. Okay, so there were 3 ways in which Hindi popular cinema negotiated with this ban. Now, how would you negotiate, and let's say, how would you show or not show a kiss? How would you do that? So there were 3 ways, 3 distinct ways, and 3 kinds of cinema reflected them. The first and the foremost is ridiculing the ban through transitions. By transitions, I mean a cut or a transition from one scene to the other, or it might be, dip to black or a fade out. Right now, I will show you a scene from Ashirwad 1968 and how they have dealt with this kissing scene. So allow me to share. Wait. I'll have to. There's a small clip, and I would love to share it with you. Yes, here it is. I hope you can see the screen. Yes.
Yes, Shomu, we can.
Yes, yes. Here. So the woman had given, lift to the man. The man is lamenting that the journey was so short. The woman demands a kind of a thanks in a rainy night. So we know, yes, we are waiting for it. Yes, we have been waiting for it. This is 1968. Go for it. Now, yes. So that's what I was trying to say. Suddenly, when we are excited that a man and a woman, after a long time, they are kissing on the scene, and suddenly there is a, there is a dip to black, and it reminds me of that, beautiful film called Cinema Paradiso. Similar situations were there. Guiso Tornatore in the 90s made a wonderful film, and it had a comment on the kind of censorship that the conservative societies had or have. Okay, so we move on to the next way how to deal with this ban. Now, prohibition as a cultural truth and becomes a part of narrative. So young couples or married couples, they should not kiss. Yes, not even on the public, but even in private, they should not kiss, because kissing is anti-national. At that point of time, there was nothing called anti-national, but it wasn't, you are not representing your nation. So kissing is a threat to the national identity. And I have 2 clippings here, very exciting clippings, both in Paris. Yes, so I would not agree that this is just a coincidence, because in 1964, Sangam and in An Evening in Paris in 1967, both show Eiffel Tower in Paris. Okay, And France, we know it's a nation of revolution and love. So I will straight away share those two scenes, and just give me some time. I have to, because wait. Wait, I was lost. So wait. First Sangam. So this is the Eiffel Tower, and we are talking about a married couple in Sangam. It's Raj Kapoor and Bajanti Mala, the superstars. So Indian cinema was going global, and something strange will happen here. This is their honeymoon. So the mood is set, and suddenly the man can see. Now, I would like to pause here. In Indian films of 1960s and afterwards, kissing, the ban on kissing was not universal, but the ban on kissing was not allowed. The ban on kissing was there only among the Indians. If you're an Indian, you cannot kiss. There's no problem in showing kiss. Now see how this refusal to a kiss becomes a national pride. This is funny. Okay, so not kissing is a part of your national identity, which is acknowledged by even a European. So that is something that we take pride in. So refusal to a kiss, even between a married couple, a conjugal couple, becomes an identity of a nation, and that's how some of the films, not some, but majority of the films portrayed it. So I have my last clip, so it's almost same, but this is not a married couple. Shammi Kapoor and Sharmila Tagore again. This is An Evening in Paris. Again, we see foreigners kissing. So it's an embarrassment for the woman.
इसमें शर्माने की क्या बात? ये तो यहाँ का रिवाज, लड़का लड़की से मिलता, मोहब्बत होती, लड़का प्रपोज करता, एंगेजमेंट रिंग पहना, और फिर क्या ख्याल?
पहले लड़का प्रपोज करता है, उसके बाद एंगेजमेंट रिंग पहनाता है, फिर
So the woman is saying, first you propose and then you can kiss.
I don't mind. I don't mind.
So the proposal is done. Exchange of the ring. It's not Indian at all, but yet.
नहीं, मैं एक हिंदुस्तानी लड़की, और हिंदुस्तानी रिवाज के मुताबिक वो शादी के बाद।
यानी शादी बहुत जल्दी करनी पड़ेगी। खैर कोई बात नहीं, तब तक
Okay. So that was it. This was one of the most predominant ways in which Hindi popular films, negotiated with this ban on kissing by supporting this idea, this moral code of national culture. Now, this this throws a few certain questions. Now, sexuality, women's body, and national identity, are they related to each other? That's one of the first questions that we come across. Counter assimilation as a guarantee of national originality. Counter assimilation with what? With Western culture. Now, this Indianness has to be established in a rigorous way after the independence. Now, women's behavior here and attire becomes the guardians of national culture. Now, this is something interesting, that the man wants to kiss, but if the woman, it's up to the woman, and it's her responsibility to uphold that national culture, that counter assimilation. And there is another question, just a doubt, food for thought. Female subjectivity may emerge from a kissing scene. So that is an entirely different, entirely different genre of thoughts, and a different kind of debate can be raised. Anyway, so we have talked about two kinds of negotiations. The third is, this is the funniest and the most embarrassing one, and hence I don't have any clippings for that. So this ban is there. A ban on kissing is there, but the situations or the conditions within the narrative, the narrative tropes are there where an inevitable kiss is about to take place. But on the contrary, that is substituted by a communal eroticism. For example, communal eroticism is a kind of a display of the woman's body and a kind of a communal inspection. Let's say, at this point of this was very popular in the 80s and the 90s, where you cannot show kiss in that way, but yes, a woman's body becomes an object of spectacle. And you will find that man and woman going behind the tree and the kiss. Okay, you just see the tree trunk, or let's say there's a cut, two lovebirds kissing each other, or flowers, or let's say the most embarrassing one, I don't have the clip, but the most embarrassing one was in a popular film. It was a huge hit. It was called Beta. And you don't show the kiss, but the woman, after getting kissed, it's obvious that the woman is wiping her lip. So, the marks and the body of a woman in films become a spectacle. And that's how you negotiate this ban on kissing. Now, these were the three types of negotiations that Hindi films had. Okay. Now, we have understood about negotiations, we have understood about ban on kissing, but it leads to a kind of a private-public divide. I would like to clear out one point, that a conjugal couple, is actually a private entity, even when they are occupying a public space. So this is very normal. This is something that the modern state, something that our modern lifestyles, modern in the sense I'm talking about anti-feudal in that respect, not in terms of technology or capitalism. So it's very normal that a conjugal couple or a married couple has to have that, or has to be allowed to have that private space even when they are in public space. But Hindi films, after 1960s till 1990s, they had a huge problem with private act of kissing, formation of the modern couple, not the feudal couple, having a claim to the private. So this having a claim to the private is actually the main or the primary motive behind the ban on kissing. But at the same time, we know that Indian films were also criticized for its extent of vulgarity. Now, for example, I'll give you a little example. For example, a number of them were there. One was Johnny Mera Naam, and it starred Devanand. And in order to attribute this women's body as spectacle, we had a different kind of character role. And we all know that it's called the vamp. And the vamp had the almost the narrative function of portraying this vulgarity. And the fallen woman who is vulgar, who shows her skin, but yes, even at in these conditions, kissing was not allowed. So it for the Indian censor board or the Indian films or Hindi films, kissing is a problem, but not vulgarity. So it's not actually what you're trying to stop. Kissing is not, the act of kissing is not what you're trying to stop or what you're trying to prohibit. It's the prohibition of the private. Now, I would like to go back to the history of the development of democracy and how the invention of the modern couple resolved the problem of despotism. Now, thanks to Groschard, he's an expert on Rousseau and French Enlightenment. According to him, I'm quoting him, the couple is the political subject that guarantees a state that is free from the risk of despotism. Now, what we all know what or who is a despot. So this is I would like to say something with Sir's permission. We often use a 4-letter word. Okay. So, and of course, yes, a 4-letter word that starts with F. Now, we use the abbreviation, and what it stands for is fornication under the consent of the king. So we need the consent of the king, actually, who is a despot, in order to execute or in order to carry out one of the most intimate and private activities. So when now we realize that how this 4-letter word actually pointed out to this condition of despotism, which was not modern, which came before the advent of the modern state. Now, how is this possible? Formation of a conjugal couple is actually a sexual contract. So please pay attention here. Formation of a conjugal couple is actually a sexual contract between two individuals. I'll come to this sexual contract, which leads to a certain kind of social contract, which enhances the pillars of democracy. And in this way, the modern state, which evolved after French Revolution, was established as against despotism, which was there before. Please note, sexual contract, here I go again, sexual contract is not a contract between a man and a woman. Sexual contract is between men. Let me read it out. Agreeing on one another's right to a space, the family, and the woman as man's property. So this mutual agreement was not between the conjugal couple, the heterosexual normative couple, but it was between men who would own property, women, and family. Food for thought, but yet. Okay, back to Hindi films. We are, just 2 slides are left. Back to Hindi films. In India, modern state is just one of the representatives of the ruling bloc. Now, even if you see look at the contemporary politics of West Bengal or overall India, you will find this to be a truth. Now, unlike the West, where modern state decides, or the ideas of modern state decides what is what, we are still in India, we are still dominated by religion, culture, caste, and a lot of faiths. So modern state is not the actual controlling factor of deciding how our lives or our cultural lives will be. This fact of modern state being just one of the competing powers in ruling bloc in India is actually creates that condition for a couple to be reabsorbed or absorbed within the patriarchal structure of a family, which is again the patriarchal structure of a family, or the the feudal family is not a part of the modern state. There's a kind of a, as Madhava Prasad would say on his study in Hindi films, there's a kind of a partnership, there is kind of an understanding between different kinds of faith. One of them is the modern state. So whenever you are seeing that, in Hindi films, when a villain is being bashed and he's being killed, it's this police who comes late, because it's not the duty of the state to poke its nose into my vengeful objectives. So that's one of the key things that is still there. Slowly it's fading. These are different conditions now, but Hindi films, uh, Hindi films did not allow the ethics of modern state to dominate its cultural representations. Now, since the modern state or the modern couple is not allowed to have its private domain within the cultural representation, that is Hindi films, there is a prohibition of the invention of the private to a great extent in Hindi films. And with this, I would like to also say that, from 60s till the 90s, this was the dominant mode. But now things are changing, and hence I will have a little, a little view on what we are doing now. Do they kiss now? Do we kiss? Yes, we have. We have started kissing a lot. So Imran Hashmi has made a name for himself as a serial kisser. And you know that a lot of debates, a lot of social upheavals have been witnessed in India because of an online, because of on-screen kissing. For example, in Dhoom 2, Aishwarya Rai, after kissing Hrithik Roshan on screen, had to face a lot of news, because kissing is something that is alien to our culture, quote unquote alien to our culture. So global Hindi films, after 90s, after globalization, started a certain kind of export quality nationalism. For example, DDLJ, for example, all the Shah Rukh Khan NRI films, for example, Tar, where this national identity has an export quality, has an export quality attached to it. Okay, now kissing returned to the screen, but yes, it hardly featured any superstar. Out of all the superstars, nowadays we see Shah Rukh Khan in a bit of these things. Salman Khan is anti-kissing. You can read his points on this aspect. Yes, Amir Khan is an exception, but yes, again, a certain kind of the way we look at women, or the role of women we have in our society. An example is that in a particular Hindi film, there was this kissing scene between Karishma Kapoor and Amir Khan, and after that, Karishma Kapoor had to face a lot of music from her own family, and Amir Khan didn't have to face a lot of things like that. So, and a certain kind of idea is developed from an Indian woman who is playing a star, and if she kisses on the screen. So that idea that of banning a kiss on the screen, that idea is still there, even if Bombay has embraced this idea of kissing. Now, we are in a graver situation. After 2014, we know that there is a rise of right-wing cultural nationalism. And it's not about prohibition of kiss. It's about those narratives that this film industry, or the film industry of post 2014 is choosing, has no plots or no situations where a man and a woman would kiss. Even if there is a woman, the woman has to play a kind of a responsible or nationally responsible role. So even if we say that where suddenly kisses are not on the screen, we can't say that because the narratives are not demanding such situations, unlike the 60s. So I hope 1001 questions will be there. So with that, this is the end of my presentation. Thank you, sir. Over to you.
Thank you, Shomo. So yes, I'm so glad that 1001 questions have come. So I'll jump straight into the questions. Just give me a second. And I must tell you that it was a very, very interesting perspective that you've shared in terms of the political aspect and the psyche aspect of it. And the concept of king's consent, and that was very interesting. I think the clippings were a very true narrative of what actually happened. The famous flowers, kissing each other, going behind the tree. I still remember there was a Hindi movie called Ashiki where the couple was kissing and there was a overcoat or something on them.
There was an umbrella.
There was an umbrella, yeah, something on them, covered this thing. So it was such a bad thing to do in a population of 1.2 billion. It's such ironic statements that go around. It's just shameful. But anyway, I will get on to the questions. Let me just see how. Just 1 second. Just give me a second. Yeah, so I think Anupriya, your questions were answered by Dr. Ghosh. Then there are questions by Shunoyon. So Shunoyon, I'll request you to ask your question one by one because you have, I think, 2 questions. So please unmute yourself and shoot. Shunoyon, for the audience, Shunoyon is our head of the department of journalism. Again, my colleague, and very, very sharp mind. So I always look at him for opinions and perspectives. So over to you, Shunoyan.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Yeah. So I will not be coming on video due to obvious reasons.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
So the question is kind of generic, but I think it's important that we address this question. So if we look at Bollywood for that matter, apart from some exceptions in the beginning, I think in the 30s and the 40s, as Professor Ghosh had pointed out, I think Bollywood as a whole has been very misogynistic, and the power dynamics that we see in Bollywood cinema, I mean, and particularly in the 80s and the 90s, is heavily tilted in favor of man, should I say. Given that context, and if that is the larger context, do you really believe that a ban in kissing or something like that is really an issue in the given context? I mean, it's a generic question. That's one of the questions that I have. And there's another question that I'll just finish and I'll leave. I had a question. So we all know that there is a right-wing narrative that is being created across the world, and it's not just in India, across the world as well. So there's a rise in right-wing, should I say, activism. So do you believe that this ban on kissing in India is a right-wing attempt to prevent counter-narratives in culture? And mind you, social inertia is what propels the right-wing narrative, if you want to look at it that way. So these are the 2 questions, the generic questions that I have, and anyone can answer that. Thank you very much.
So between Shomo and Dr. Ghosh, who would like to take it up? Dr. Ghosh, the teacher first. Yeah. Because Shomo has been, I mean, let me just appraise the audience that, during the entire day, Shomo and Shunayan are in a long debate. And the topic of the debate more or less wanders around something very close to such discussions. And so let Shunayan hear from somebody else across in another continent. So, over to Dr. Ghosh. And then Shomo, you can add to what Dr. Ghosh is saying.
Thank you. Actually, it is actually really useful to have that context. No, thank you very much, Shunan, for your questions. If I may, there's two connected questions here. There is the question of misogyny in popular Hindi film, and I try not to use the word Bollywood because I grew up at a time when the word Bollywood was a pejorative, and we didn't really anticipate the kind of popularity that tag would acquire, and that is obviously something that is still a source of perennial awkwardness. That said, the question of misogyny in Bollywood is actually something which has probably become more prominent throughout the 1980s and the 1990s in a way that I don't quite recall from the 50s and the 60s. The 50s and the 60s, misogyny and sexism are very different things. The 50s and the 60s were very sexist, but sexism and misogyny are related, but being related but different things. I think the kind of misogyny that we see in the 1980s and the 1990s and thereafter, that is probably something which has become an uncomfortable characteristic of branch of popular Hindi film, right? What you saw in the 1950s and the 1960s was a far more feudal, a far more rooted feudal structure, an unyielding structure, and there was also a conflict between generations, as it were. That conflict between generations seems to have acquired some kind of a pantomime dimension in films like DDLJ, which I know Shoma you referred to, Dilwale Dulhania Le Jayenge, right? So the question of misogyny, given this broader question of misogyny, does the ban on kissing really matter? I would say that it does. I would say that it does, because if battles have to be won, then battles have to be won with small victories, one at a time. So that's my reason for saying yes. But I do appreciate and I do understand the question, that the question of misogyny is a far bigger one and a far more important one than merely the simple act of banning or not banning kissing sequences. The second thing that I think is worth saying is that while we seem to work, with what appears to be a system, it is subject to sort of individual dispensations. So whether it is current governments or whether it is governments in the 1970s, which were led by a very different political party in India, there are governments which have their own reasons for banning and censoring films. So throughout the 1970s, for instance, I remember Kissa Kursi Ka and many of the other films, including in the 1980s, a film called New Delhi Times, and many others which were banned.
Yeah, I remember both the films, sir. So I remember both the films very distinctly because they are very, very memorable films. Once you watch them, it's very difficult to sleep at night very peacefully in terms of what you actually end up accepting as a social system. It's very disturbing.
So very, very much so, very much so. And the thing is that we might look at this as a kind of right-wing situation, but I think it goes beyond that. I think it is ultimately a question of systems of power seeking to protect themselves and preserve their bases, right? So that is the way I would look at it. When that system of power is very clearly on the right, then that system of power manifests itself through a certain set of things that it wants to ban. It might be certain things that we want or do not want to eat. It might be certain codes of behavior. It might be certain codes of dress. It might be, depictions of kissing on screen. If it is a different kind of political dispensation and a different kind of power structure, there will be other things that it wants to ban. But it is, the act of censorship is an act of self-preservation, and it is an act of self-preservation dependent on the nature of the dispensation of power. That is something that I do believe in. So in the contemporary question, it is probably more about the right wing, the politics of the right, than anything else. And that's not just restricted to India. That is politics which we encounter in various parts of the world. But the question of censorship is a broader one and a bigger one. That would be my response. I don't know whether that addresses what you wanted addressed, Shunayan.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. It absolutely captured what I wanted to know. Anyway, we'll have a discussion on this later on. Thank you.
Yeah, and Shomo, if you wish to add something to it.
Well, I have a lot of examples. I don't want to, give my point of view, but I will just name 3 films which are considered to be commercially the most successful films. And I would just would like the audience and all of you, and especially Shunayan, to imagine how it portrayed women. First and foremost, Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge. The very agency of the very agency of this formation of conjugal couple and how it will decide its path depends on 2 men. The father, Simran, when asks Shah Rukh Khan, please let's elope, forget about all these facets and all these, and the man says, hey, nahi, let's take the permission of your father. So and yes, Shah Rukh Khan says that, until and unless your father nods his head, we will not do anything. So and the the only place where the woman can lament is with Farida Jalal in the kitchen. The second film is 3 Idiots. I know a lot of people will hate me for criticizing it, but think about from a woman's point of view in 3 Idiots. Even the engineering college was all men's, or even if it wasn't, all the major players of the entire narrative were men. And thirdly, which is icing on the cake, is Bahubali. So I don't want to elaborate on Bahubali. It will be a different thing. But yes, I absolutely agree with Shumanda. The censorship and the kind of the political power that is executed and reflected through cultural productions, they are a greater threat. Yes, they are greater threats. Yes, of course.
Thanks, Shomo. Thanks, Dr. Ghosh, and thanks, Shunayan, for such thought-provoking questions. So I have Shomendro Bhattacharya with me. So Shomendro, you've asked a question on the film Zarina, made in 1932 and banned due to 86 different kisses. Shomendro, if you're there, if you wish to ask this question, directly, so you may.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much, sir. It's good evening, sir. Good evening to all dignitaries. So I have a small query about the film called Zarina. It was released in 1932 and it was banned about to 86 different cases. So like from 1940s to up to 1990s. So for as far as my knowledge is concerned, there was no such prohibition in respect or in due to this regard actually. So could you just emphasize or explain on this topic? Thank you so much.
Shomendro also is my colleague. He's an ace camera person. So who would like to take on, Shomo or Dr. Ghosh?
I haven't seen Zarina, so I want
Shomo, please. Please. Dr. Ghosh?
Okay. Zarina, 1932. I think one of the things that was becoming very clear by that time was that, especially if you look at the 2 examples that I talked about, Throw of Dice and the other one and we were all 1928, 29, that the act of kissing was also becoming an act of rebellion. And Zarina is obviously a film which sort of pushed the boundaries. And one of the reasons why one of the reasons why they came down so heavily on it is because an example needed to be made out of it. So while there were, if there were sort of individual instances, censor boards would look away from them because the preoccupation was with the political narrative, and that is basically where most of the banning was happening. If, on the other hand, the boundaries were stretched so far as to include 86 cases, then an example had to be made, and that's what that's the predicament that befell Zarina. It is also worth pointing out that since the 1970s, there have been films which sort of have hopefully had kissing sequences. Satyam Shivam Sundaram, I remember. Bobby, I remember. And a very early memory, of course, is of going to watch Ghare Baire. Ghare Baire, one of the things that got talked about, and we are celebrating the centenary year of Satyajit Ray, so it's sort of pertinent to bring him into the kind of this particular question. One of the things that Ghare Baire got talked about was not its importance as a film, but the fact that it had significant kissing sequences. And that is actually something which earned for it a particular sort of notoriety. How could an icon like Satyajit Ray do something like this? I mean, that was the kind of refrain that you would hear. So, but there have been directors who have included kissing sequences in their films throughout the 1970s and the 1980s. And that's something that I did want to say. So Zarina was one of these films which was sort of made an example of, but there have been other films which have been able to sort of get away with it under different guises.
Thanks, Dr. Bush. I have a question from Koel Mitra. Koel, are you there? Then you can ask the question directly.
Yes, I am, sir.
Yeah.
So my question was if by kissing in Indian cinema, we necessarily would keep referring to romantic kisses. This is something which I understand, but there's also this plethora of kisses which are non-romantic in nature, and it immediately kind of changes the dynamics. It's when the mother kisses the son on the forehead, or after a Raksha Bandhan, probably the brother kisses the sister. If we were to really talk about kissing and then create a binary between a romantic kissing in Indian cinema and a non-romantic kissing in Indian cinema, or if it would be slightly more nuanced than that. I mean, anybody can answer this, both Shumonda and Shomoda.
Shoma, do you want to go first on this one?
It's a little difficult question, but I was not really looking at kisses which are non-romantic in nature. The first thing that came to my mind, Koel, was that of the villains of the 80s. They would forcefully kiss. That would be counted as an abuse. And it seemed that the Indian audience had no problems with that, because that was not entailing any kind of empowerment for the conjugal couple. That would throw a kind of a challenge to the larger authorities. So we know the moment that this kind of an abusive kissing is there, we know that there will be a kind of a vengeance. So any act of this kind of act of violence or forcing oneself on another woman, so the hero is coming. So we are anticipating something. But regarding the other kisses, non-romantic kisses, surprisingly, it's entirely my point of view that there were very little kisses like that. I remember probably there was a kiss in Agnipath, the older Agnipath. I don't know, Shumonda, you might just, Rohini Hattangiri and Amitabh Bachchan. So when Amitabh Bachchan was dying, after
in the last scene, in the last scene. Yeah, in the last scene.
But Nirupa Roy, I hardly, can recollect any kissing scene until and unless Amitabh Bachchan and all the heroes were kids. So I don't remember any kissing between brothers and sisters. So these are very intriguing questions and needs a lot of research. So thanks, Koel, for this question. Shumonda?
Yes, just to add to this, I think also one of the things that we were doing is looking at not just the act of kissing, but the act of banning. So as part of this discussion, I think there were sort of two specific things that we were looking at. We were looking at the connected nature of these two questions, the act of kissing and the act of banning. And the act of banning is obviously something which comes from a political response, comes also from a social response and a societal response. So in that sense, there are social pressures, there are societal pressure groups, and all of them sort of contribute to the kind of narrative around banning. So that's also one of the reasons why there was a sort of specific focus. I think non-romantic kissing and there are examples, but not massively, not very prominently between brother and sister, but between mother and son, yes, very much. But the thing is that because these are innocuous, they seldom attract comment. Much more problematic is when I see something like Uttam Kumar planting a kiss on Suchitra Sen's forehead as part of a romantic couple. That leaves us neither here nor there. But that I suppose is something that we have all encountered.
Yes, we all have encountered and
you.
suffered that.
Thank you both. Yes.
But very interesting question, Koel. Thank you for the question. So, Joyati Gupt, she has a question. Joyati, are you there? So let me read out her question if she's not there. One is talking entirely in the context of heterosexuality in more contemporary films. This may take on a dimension that can become even more explosive if queer couples are shown on screen. Any censorship on that? That too, we have, I think, seen a huge amount of censorship there. From Fire to all, we have numerous examples of, films that were not allowed to even be screened and all that. And we used to wait for the film festivals to take a, to see the films which were supposed to, run normally at movie theaters. And unfortunately, we were, subject to that kind of a, ban by the censor board, and we had to wait for the film festivals to come to watch those films which win so many accolades abroad, and the Indian audience are not able to see them. It's more about, I think, accepting the relationship, and kissing is just an outcome of that, and accepting the same-sex relationship, and kissing is just an outcome. That's my perspective. And Dr. Ghosha and Shomu can elucidate on that.
There's a couple of things that are sort of worth looking at, I think, and that is the censorship codes as we have seen them. So, and this is not just unique to India. When we talk about Hollywood, for instance, we talk about something called the Hays Code, and the Hays Code in Hollywood existed until 1968. And the Hays Code, for instance, banned any depiction of licentious or suggestive nudity, right? In fact, or in silhouette, any lecherous or licentious notice thereof by other characters in the picture. And there's a very careful list of do's and don'ts. So it's actually something that you see in American cinema, and you see in cinemas across different parts of the world, and you see it in Indian cinema, and that's partly because there are these codes, and these are sort of variants of very similar modes of thinking. And I think it's probably worth placing Indian censorship in the context of the kind of wider ambit of censorship practices elsewhere. With representations of queerness, for instance, Hollywood found its own way of circumventing them. Indian cinema is discovering its own ways of circumventing this, and we all remember, many of us remember, not, I won't say we all, many of us are of an age as to remember Fire, and Deepa Mehta's Fire, and the kind of opprobrium that it sort of drew. Platforms like Amazon Prime, Netflix, and many of these other platforms have therefore also become voices of dissent, platforms for dissent in terms of the ways in which they are able to challenge censorship practices. And I think that that's something that's sort of worth bearing in mind, because these platforms, the content created for these platforms, a lot of this content is incredibly cinematic. So in that sense, it sort of changes the very definition of the ways in which we perceive film and film culture, right? But it is also a way of challenging some of these portrayals. there has always been a kind of a morality imposed about queer relationships, and that has predominantly been part of the censor code. There's absolutely no denying that. But on the other hand, there are ways in which film industries have found possibilities of circumventing them. And I'm hopeful that platforms are going to be sort of the new dimension in which these battles are being enacted.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. I remember, I mean, not because of this thing, but for other political pressures. I work with a Bengali director, Onik Dotto. So I worked in two of his films. One of his films called Bhobishyoter Bhoot, which is kind of a sequel to his Bhooter Bhobishyot, which was his first film, and a very, very popular film. Bhobishyoter Bhoot was not allowed to be screened in West Bengal. We had kind of there were protests which were musical protests, dramatic protests, but not basically a very creative protests that were done. And then finally he had to go to court, and Supreme Court actually opened it up. And so that is a film that because of Netflix and all that would immediately be shown in Netflix. It's not still yet on Netflix, but the point is that because it was a battle of the screening on big theaters, so therefore the battle went on. However, had it been the Netflix open, like Onik's other films, there was no government, no local government which would have been able to stop Onik from screening that movie.
I agree.
And I think similarly, this what you're talking about, that these OTT platforms have been able to, give voice to that, wherein such mechanisms were there which were capable of actually not allowing, a work of art to be showcased to the audience. So today it is a huge democratization in that format, and there is no one big daddy who is going to stop you from doing that. So that's a great relief, I believe, for the creative people.
I remember Bhobishyoter Bhoot. I just I knew that it will be banned. I knew it, and I think I watched it on the third day, because after 4 or 5 days, not even 7 days, after 4 days it was I think, and it was a embarrassing moment for the West Bengal government.
Yeah, when they had to say sorry and
yes.
pay a
and they had to give
fee.
compensation, I guess.
Yeah, of course.
Yes. So
and I remember, they started with an excuse that the software is not working and this, that, and all that, and people were going there and not able to see the film. They were asked, they had bought the tickets, but yet they were not able to see the film. Between this small group, my only thing is that the film was not that great. The hoopla and hype and everything happened, yes, but the film was not that great. It was not Onik's best film. But that is the problem with censorship. That is the problem with this thing. So even the films which are not of that quality, they end up taking so much of your visibility, so much of your mind space, because of this resistance. And that's a wrong pointer that I've seen. And I've also told Ronnie that I don't think this is one of your best works, because it is too much politically motivated and in more of a statement rather than a cinema that I would like to go to the theaters and watch. It may be a good documentary or good commentary on the political scene, but I don't think it's cinema. The narrative is not that of a cinema which is supposed to, at the end of the day, give entertainment to you, because you're paying for the ticket and you're going to watch it in the theaters. So I think that is a flip side of this this kind of a ban and censorship thing. So I have just 3 more questions. So Shoma Sri, then Momita, and then Nobina. So Shoma Sri, and then we'll close this wonderful session. So Shoma Sri, are you there?
Oh yes, sir.
Yeah, just ask.
So actually, my question is at the beginning of the meeting, you itself said that when you talked about this topic to other teachers, they were not that comfortable and they were like, "Itani ki bolvo" and all that. So I think it's still a taboo talking about kissing and all that, the natural behaviors. And I think it's not right. This thing shouldn't be a taboo in today's society. Then why should we be talking about banning kissing in movies?
Shomastri, which batch are you in?
I'm in first year SOMC in
Okay. So be
Department of
thankful you
Dance.
have a great dean. Okay. Thanks for your question.
Okay, sir.
I couldn't agree more. You know, what you've said is absolutely right. So thankfully, you don't have a dean like that. So, and neither do you have professors like that. So
that's why we are talking against, thanks
yeah.
to, I was in two minds that whether this subject will be, accepted by our dean or the department. And to my, to my surprise,
Utter
he had
surprise, yeah.
absolutely no problem with this. And Shomasri, that's why we are talking against the ban, against these strict codes. Just now Shumanda said, mentioned about the Hayes Code, one of the most remembered codes. A lot of Andreotti law was there, which strangled the Italian neorealism, and we all had during the Congress too, during BJP, even during CPIM, during TNC, all these ruling parties, they had their own
agendas to fulfill, yeah.
films that they targeted. And one of my surprise, but to my surprise, the CPIM government banned Harvard.
Yeah, of course.
Yes. So, and it was so surprising for me because that film speaks for a particular ideology. It's a ultra left film. And when you are in government, probably you lose your senses, so you don't know which film is talking on your behalf and which is not. So you only think about the power. So of course we are against all these kinds of bans.
I remember Bibor also faced a similar fate. I think Dr. Ghosh wants to add to that.
Yes, just a very quick word. I mean, thank you for the question, because I think what you're saying makes acute sense. I just remembered a couple of things which I thought might be useful. One, it sometimes depends on who who is chairing the censor board. So when it was Sharmila Tagore, a few years back, her position was very clear that we had moved on as a society, and she admitted the largest number of films featuring kissing sequences. There was a surfeit of kissing sequences at that time. A few years later, when we had a different chair in the censor board, Pehlaj Nihalani, he wanted kissing sequences taken out of James Bond films. So it depends not merely on the system, but who is running the system. And that's one of the reasons why, to come back to your question, it is important to continue talking about it so that we remain vigilant as a society in terms of making sure that these things are done in a consistent, consistent way for everybody.
Right. And it's not ad hoc. It cannot depend from chair to chair. It's not acceptable. It's not acceptable. As a society, if we have moved on, if we have matured, then that should reflect in the kind of films and the kind of film screening that is happening. I couldn't agree more. So Momita, over to you, and then Nobina, and then we'll close the session. If Momita is not there, then let me ask the question on her behalf. So why do we relate chastity as a virtue for women, even in this era? Kissing is still, it seems to be a strict no-no. We tend to judge women who indulge in this act on screen. Though I feel OTT is bringing in fresh ideas on this aspect, but still popular Hindi films are adrift from the act of kissing, even include birds to signify kissing. So this is from Momita.
So you may
I can, yes.
Yeah.
Shoma, do you want to, or
No, 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 no. I want you to answer.
Oh, okay, right. Part of this is about a culture of anxiety. We talk about moral panics, right? Moral panics is a term that you see on the pages of film studies books on spectatorship. Moral panics and societal anxieties. Now, when you have major actors having anxieties, then you suddenly realize that there are bigger questions, usually economic questions involved. The economic questions are based on, for instance, the massive budgets in which these films that they are featured in are made. So you have a film like Padmavati, and then suddenly there's a massive ruckus. And even if it is a key, it's a token change. You've got to change it to Padmavat, and that way everybody has won, because you have to save your. It doesn't make sense, but on the other hand, something has been done. People have seen that something has been done, and everybody can move on. Everybody who has had their protest has seen it succeed to a certain extent. Everybody can say, we have been proved right. What I'm basically getting at is this. This idea of censorship is actually something which is based on an idea of purity. We wanted to keep our societies pure. We wanted to keep our men, our women pure. We wanted to keep our children innocent. We want to keep our families intact. We want to keep our couple relationships preserved, right? There is almost a kind of a huge protectionist measure, a kind of protectionist social ring that we throw, because it is part of the nation's project to nurture its societies. And that is where it ends up taking away the independence that is part of that nurture. We talk about rights, but on the other hand, when we form societal rings, we also compromise those rights to a certain extent. And that is where there is a battle between censorship and what it actually takes and how much it actually gives. Chastity is merely a single factor in that wider social ring, because it is symbolic of all that purity connotes. Does make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, a very interesting perspective. Let me switch to Nobina, and I think Shashwat also has a very interesting question. So I'll take Nobina's question and then Shashwat. Nobina, are you there, or yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay. A very warm good evening to everyone. Really enjoyed a very filmy academic discourse. Really enjoyed a lot, because what I'm telling you, I'm heading a kind of a film club, and all the time I was in a rush that, if I will talk about, or I will discuss about, if I'll screen about kissing or maybe a love making, oh my God, I may be as an academic doing a crime. My previous question has been definitely been answered, but right now I'm asking as a mentor of a film club. I always think, which are the movies that are pure and clean? So this is going on. But right now you were telling me that, in 40s, there were kissing scene. It was all it was all accepted, and at that time the society was more progressive, because we always tend to see that films are more of reflection of society. And right now when I see middle class of people, and I'm one of the very much example, that watching a kissing scene or love making is just a sin. Watching a love making scene is a sin, and watching a kissing scene in front of parents will feel hesitated, and children will know it's good to Netflix and good to something. How we can sensitize and create an awareness amongst not only the people, those who are only watching, among even our society and a normal, because I'm been different all the time, don't watch movies because you are not doing any academic thing. So this is what background I faced a lot of time, and still facing sometimes, what to show, what not to. So how we can keep an awareness to it, and
No,
how
I understand. No, I think the sanitization needs to be in our own heads, and if our own thoughts are sanitized, the world outside would be much more sanitized, and then we won't have to, we will not need a censor board to do that. We will not need a censorship on books. As an author, every time I write something and I want to explicitly, describe a scene, I think 10 times because I know that this will have a consequence. So my editor reaches out to me and tells me that, Mahul, this will not work. This will get stuck here, there, 10 questions and all that. And so she ends up rewriting, rather sanitizing those things. But there are certain things which are need of the hour, need of the moment, need of the narrative. And we all have to compromise on that in a bit, as long as the censorship monster is always lurking around. But I think that is how it is. But Dr. Ghosh or Shomo, if you would like to respond to that.
Sir, would you like to respond to that?
Okay. Thank you very much for your question, Nabina. Creating awareness is a very difficult business. Creating awareness is a very difficult business. It depends, the degree of difficulty depends on who you are trying to create awareness amongst. And that, I think, is probably the larger question of censorship. The larger question of censorship, and this has to do with the previous questions, right? The larger question of censorship is that who is it for? What we understand as urban audiences, in a certain part of India are all particularly exclusive and specialist things. What we understand as urban audiences in Kolkata may not be, I'm not saying is not, I'm saying may not be what somebody not very far away from Kolkata, maybe, a small town in Bardhaman district perceives in a very different way. And that perception, once again, might be very different from somebody in Dinajpur. And once again, it might be very different from somewhere, in Gurdaspur, in Punjab, and in Tamil Nadu, right? So who is censorship for? Censorship is essentially a way of justifying a moral code of conduct in terms of the ways in which we think it will lead to kind of social good.
Right.
But the idea of social good, and that is where the fallacy is, the idea of social good is very different, and it depends on culture, it depends on who you are, it depends on where you are, and so on. So in that sense, creating awareness is actually something which is specific to context, and it depends on who you are addressing, because you have to address those questions based on their parameters. That is the only way you can actually persuade them.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
Absolutely.
Thank you for motivating, and I will showcase more of such film, not intentionally because I wanted to show it, but more of because of awareness. I will definitely do that.
To my mind, the best way of tackling a problem is to confront it head on.
And I will definitely do it. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
That's a great answer. So Shashwat, another colleague of mine. So Shashwat is a former editor of Gomantak Times. He has joined us a few months back in the Department of Journalism. So Shashwato, if you can kindly ask your question.
Hello, sir. Good evening. Thank you for giving this opportunity to ask the question. It's a wonderful experience hearing the esteemed panelists. My question is, we have been discussing about the traditional cinema and portrayal of kissing and sexual feelings, whatever. And then there is the extreme form. Another extreme of that is the way nudity and sex are being openly shown in OTT platforms, the other side of the story today. And now the government has come with the intermediary IT guidelines that tends to bring the OTT platforms under the IT Act and digital censorship of the government. Do you think that it has been an overdose of sex and nudity that has led to this step, or this is just another extension of from cinema to digital, the extension of censorship? And what implications will that have on? What implications do you think it will have, if at all, on the creative freedom? And can creative freedom be based on so much of overdose of sex and nudity?
Dr. Ghosh, I think you are the best person to respond.
Oh, goodness gracious. Thank you. No, very interesting question. And it's probably a question that we all grapple with in our very different ways. You see, if we are looking at Netflix and Amazon Prime, then that is one kind of OTT platform. But OTT platforms, even with OTT platforms, there are several levels and there are several audiences that these OTT platforms direct themselves towards. With some of these OTT platforms and some of the content created for them, what you're saying in terms of the kinds of excesses, there will probably arguably be a grain of truth to that. However, if you think of the bill, as it were, and how that bill is implemented is obviously something that we will have to see. But the initial rumblings are problematic. Problematic in the sense that Tandav is one of the first instances where, you know, there was an openly sort of political narrative which came in for a certain kind of censorship. I understand a couple of days back there was an intervention on the sets of a television an OTT platform series called Ashram, and apparently Prakash Jha has been convinced that he needs to change the title of it. Now it's the Padmavat thing. So in that sense, yes, you're absolutely right. This is actually something which is being transferred from the cinema experience to the screen experience in terms of the OTT platforms and the ways in which we are looking at things. But it depends to a certain extent on the political will. If the political will is to govern without suppressing, then it actually might be productive and creative. If it is about certifying rather than censoring, then it might be productive. If, on the other hand, if it is about clamping down, then it is inevitably unproductive. And that is something that I think the jury is still out on.
Absolutely, sir. I couldn't agree more.
I would like to add to that. There was this web series called Laila. And it's a futurist kind of a, it's a dystopic web series where water is scarce and the entire land of India is governed by something like a Nazi party who are aspiring for Aryabharta. So this word Aryabharta, Huma Qureshi was there. Aryabharta had hurt the present regime, and we could never see season 2 or season 3. It had to be stopped. And with those saffron names, so it was quite direct, yet it wasn't direct. And we also know the Tanish ad that a few days ago there was huge ruckus where the Muslim and the Hindu, they are celebrating probably a family. Two women are celebrating a Diwali. So these kinds of things I think it goes with the popular sentiment. For example, if you convince a majority that you are threatened by a minority, then you can put any narrative. For example, what is happening in Bangladesh, or what is happening in India, or what happened a few days ago in different nations, United States, for example. So censor board, I think, adds to the popular manipulation. And of course, it's in whatever you are censoring, it is anti-aesthetics. It is a kind of putting an obstacle to one's creative freedom. So I'm quite doubtful whether a film like Parasite or Breaking Bad or even Fight Club, a film like Fight Club, would have been allowed to release in India. So there are, so in Indian scenario, things are becoming very sticky. So that's my view.
May I add something? I just had something to say, basically.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So this term overdose of nudity and sexuality is a very problematic term. How do you define what is overdose of nudity and sexuality? And this will all depend on what the regime is. Right now, what the BJP is thinking will be entirely different from, let's say, for example, if some other party comes to power. So this concept of overdose, we need to come out of that concept.
Who determines the right dose?
Who determines
the right dose?
Come out of this, and we really need to understand that let creators create things. If we don't like it, we will not watch it. As simple as that.
Sure.
Why do we have to create ruckus about overdose of nudity and sexuality? Is all that I want to say. Thank you.
There is something that I need to add.
Shomo, Dr. Ghosh needs to go. So, I think be very brief and then we'll close the session.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
There is, for the past 1.5 years, there is this emergence of Indian porn industry. And it's there on different platforms. And I think what Shashwat sir is trying to address is, I don't find any excess nudity or violence or sexual acts on OTTs, the kind of narratives that we see. But I think there is this emergence of new Indian porn industry, which is very much on demand right now. I think the government is trying to address that. I'm not very sure, but yes, something like that is happening. Similar thing happened in 1989 or 1990. We have a film on that by Nawazuddin Siddiqui. So anyway.
Sure. Thanks. So let me bring this session to a closure, and I would like to deeply thank BHASPA for their wonderful support. John and Dr. Ghosh, Shomo and Dr. Ghosh, you both made the session extremely lively, and you can see, I was not able to finish the questions, and we've already ran out of time by, I think, 45 minutes. So, this speaks volumes of the engagement that, all the students had and all the faculty had. Thanks so much, students. Thanks so much, the faculty members, for being there. So I'll share the recording, and we can share it with the BHASPA students who are not, I think, many of whom were not able to join this discussion. It would have been great had all of them would have been here. So perhaps in the next webinar, we'll see more of BHASPA participation in terms of students. Thank you, Dr. Ghosh, for being there. Thank you, everyone. And with this, I bring this to a closure. Thank you. Please take care. And it was a great discussion. Take care.
Thank you very much, and thank you everybody from Adamas, and thank you Dr. Brahmo, thank you Shomo Shubro, thank you Shunayan, thank you everyone, all students for a magnificent contribution and a brilliant seminar. It was really enjoyable. I hope we will see more BHASPA students next time. I think it's probably something to do with the timing as well, and that's partly because I know that it is, this is teaching time. So we will look at our timetables, and we will.
So the next one we'll schedule it accordingly. Yeah, absolutely.
We will position it accordingly. On the other hand, great experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.